Holla ballers, what's going on? It's Preacher. Let's have a talk about legendaries, shall we? I don't usually like to weigh in on the legendary discussion because it's a loot discussion. And I'm not very popular in that regard because I don't care much for loot. I've replaced best in slot too many times to really care about loot. I do apologise for my cough, I'm still quite ill. But we are on the mend, so it shouldn't be a big issue. The legendary situation, I think it's a worthy talking point for a number of reasons. One, we've hit the bottom of the barrel by a long fucking way when it comes to legendaries. Mr. Pandaria, well, we'll talk about it later. And we're going back in time. We're going back to a time of very powerful heroes who wield some very powerful weapons. World of Warcraft has a very rich history. And that history hasn't really been explored too much. We've had people come back and people who live forever or have been reborn. This is only my final form kind of thing. It was merely a setback, so he said. But now we're going back to a time when these guys were living, breathing creatures. We're going to be fighting them. We're going to be dropping them. And I was sure when Gul'dan shows his face, I will remind him that his skull is polished to a really nice predator finish and sitting politely in my bank. I'll be happy to show him that. The legendary discussion. I've never seen anything really break a solid guild more than legendaries. Friendships are broken, egos are bruised. It can really crumble some very, very unexpected guilds. Some guilds that you just would never predict this guild would fall apart, but a legendary situation can in fact cause those guilds to crumble. Blizzard's aware of that. And the traditional model of a legendary weapon, which I think all legendaries realistically should be weapons. They should be weapons. Legendary weapons are the key aspect of what a legendary should be. A legendary piece of armor, let alone a cloak, is just, it's not quite there. Come on. They should be legendary weapons, but of course weapons by their very nature are limited to certain classes and certain specs. So then we run into the issue of the fact that so many people are not going to be able to access them at all, and that creates all kinds of rage. If we can assume based on the LFR rage of the item nerf, if people are calling it, despite the fact that it's clearly a buff, in terms of drop rates especially, it just has a different name, then we can only imagine the kind of rage we see, especially as we go lower down the tier in terms of guilds of what legendaries can actually do. Who deserves them? That big old discussion. I can tell you a story during the Dragon Soul, the Fangs of the Father, is that I was the melee class officer of my then guild, and the legendary discussion obviously came up. I had two rogues who were I had three rogues in the guild, one trial and two rogues who had been with the guild for years. Hadn't really missed any raids besides the ones that they just couldn't have been possibly have avoided. And they were both grown men in their 30s. And then I asked the question on the day we started raiding, as obviously the quest was about to take place, is who's getting the legendary, guys? Surely you don't need me to officiate between two 30-year-old men regarding this quest. And they wouldn't decide between them. So I said, look, you're both equally entitled as far as I'm concerned, roll for it. And then the whispers began. Two close friends, been raiding together for years, far longer than I had. I had been in the guild infinitesimally less time than they had. But then the whispers started about they deserved it more, they deserve it more, this is unfair, blah, 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 it's bullshit. And it's surprising to see how much that shiny orange text can actually drive people apart. What we're talking about here is in Walls of Draenor, we're obviously going to have legendaries. Blizzard has touched on the subject that yes, there will be legendaries. How are they going to do it? Don't know. But again, as I said, we're going back in time to when there are very powerful items. When Arthas was announced as a boss, the forums were, of course, crying with the idea that Frostmourne would be in there. And who were Blizzard to deny the players the chance of a Frostmourne? The most legendary weapon in the game, pretty much. And then, of course, they came across with the Shadowmourne. And that worked out quite well. But traditionally, we've had all kinds of different systems towards legendaries. The bindings, of course, from Mortal Core, as many of you will know. And then moving on to the Sulfuris, the Atiesh, and then going on and so forth into the game. Sometimes legendaries are useful, sometimes they are not. Thoradal the Star's Fury, particularly useless. The famous moment, of course, when a Thoradal dropped for a guild, that the bow actually went to a rogue, and the hunters didn't mind, despite the forums crying out with the pain and suffering that this did not go to a hunter. The hunters are well aware that progress is over. The bow is officially fucking useless. And therefore it was no problem that it went to a rogue who was far more deserving in terms of DKP time and guild investment. Legendaries are a problem. So we've got many different systems. This is really what we want to talk about. What is the best system to devise a legendary? I think we can all agree. I didn't really want to rant on it too much, but you know what? Fuck it. It's got to be said. Mr. Pandaria is disgrace. An absolute fucking disgrace. It's diabolical. How the system for the legendary cloaks came to be okayed. Many meetings will have been had. People have sat around boardrooms discussing this system, and people said okay to the Mists of Pandaria legendary questline. I almost feel like it's a cop-out. Often I speak to people who have left the game, old school players, very big, powerful players in the game, for great guys, and they tell me that, you know what, Mists of Pandaria, I left because it was a cop-out. It's too easy. And the argument I always give back is the game's not too easy. We can clearly see from the stats that the harder difficulties of the game are not accessed by many people at all. But the legendary questline certainly doesn't help that. A legendary journey. What is a legendary supposed to be? Fun, first and foremost. It's supposed to be fucking awesome. It's supposed to be the best thing of all time. This is the item you are not going to replace for the remainder of an expansion. And sometimes these legendaries do come earlier in the game, like Valania coming during Ulduar, which then went on into ICC and so on. And we just don't have the power to say to people that this can't be cool, because it has to be. It has to be awesome. This is legendary. This is the stuff of legends. Our journey to get to it should be epic as balls. It should be amazing, and it should never be a sigh of relief once you actually get it. It should just be one of pure joy. A couple of things that really screw that over, I think, before we get really in-depth on Mists of Pandaria. Collectible parts. I kind of see where Blizzard comes from with collectible parts. Shadowfrost shards, shards from Nax for Atiesh and so on, and even the shards of Valania. Constructing the legendary weapon, I actually think is okay. What I don't particularly like is when a boss or that drop just turns into nothing more than collect the rabbit livers from the rabbits in the surrounding area. If you're just doing something normally, I find that really tedious, but I think there's a place for it in the legendary questline. It's literally a time gate. We're gating it off how quickly people can acquire this weapon. As simple as that. We need to extend it, otherwise people could possibly get it too quick if we don't devise something else. And having a low drop rate item that comes from raid bosses, it kind of has its place in the questline. Then we have Mists of Pandaria, which used that system 3 fucking times. A 4th time if we include the Valor points, which are just flat out time gates over and over again. What kind of questline in your mind involves the most tedious style of MMO questing, which is collect the things, and you found 4 places for it in a single questline that is for a legendary? What? Couldn't think of anything more. The saddest part about the Mists of Pandaria legendary questline is it's done literally by just playing the game as you would anyway. Doing BGs, collecting Valor points, a currency that is devised just to pad out gear. It's a buff to gear. It's filler. That is now part of a legendary quest? What? What am I reading here? Collect the runestones, collect the secrets, collect the sigils, collect all the things. And you don't have to do anything special for them at all. You just do what you'd ordinarily be doing, and you can even do it on the easiest setting in the game. Wow. I feel really bad in terms of Mists of Pandaria for the guys who actually created the story arc that went along with it. The artists who designed the cutscenes and the scenarios, because they're awesome. The story that goes along with the legendary questline is fantastic. Totally amazing. But there are very few people out there who believe that a meta gem is interesting, that you have no control over, and in fact is so completely passive you don't do anything with it. A legendary cloak, which by all accounts doesn't even look cool. And I agree. Having played around with the cloaks, they just don't look good. I don't think so. The proc's kind of cool once or twice, and then it kind of really starts to wane because it looks very plastic. Legendary gem socket? Have mercy on my soul that there is a legendary gem socket, let alone a legendary gem that just gives flat stats. 500 Agi is not legendary in anybody's mind at all. Thunder Fury causing a blizzard of cyclones to fly around mobs, that's pretty legendary. 500 Agi is not legendary, but it's a filler preach, it's a filler, it doesn't matter. The sad part, again, I don't want to rant on it too much, but when Blizzard tells you that daily quests are optional, and then they tie the only reputation that is required for the legendary quest into just daily areas, I don't think optional means what you think it means, because it's just a grind. Another time sink in order to prolong it. But enough. We agree. Mists of Pandaria's questline was awful. So what system was better? A few of them I think worked out really well. In fact, Thunder Fury I think is particularly good. 2 RNG drops. That gives you the anticipation that comes from killing that boss. Can be frustrating. No doubt about it. But there's a joy that comes from every time that boss dies when you see him fall to the floor and the loot sparkles come up and the raid leader bends over in his typical fashion. I think that's pretty cool. And then you finally get it. And then you're going off and you're visiting other dungeons to actually get things done, to collect things from different raids that aren't really tied to bosses. Not just boss drops, which I think is a very, very easy cop-out. It's a boss drop. No, we have to look for other things that are going on in the dungeon. We have to check these loots that are going on. We have to mind control things to learn new spells in order to actually create this weapon. There's a raid effort going on. It's not just the raid doing what the raid does anyway. I think that is always a terrible idea. So I actually think, in general, the best questline so far was Shadowmourne. Shadowmourne involved doing other stuff within the raids you were already doing, and that is brilliant. Yes, we're going to be going to these raids anyway, but you know what? I'm doing something legendary. I have to do something different. I have to control these aspects of the game. I have to do something different with the Blood Queen. I have to do something different with Putricide. I have to do these various tasks within a raid that we're doing anyway, and it adds the mix, it adds some flavor to it. Very cool. Not tedious, not frustrating. A little bit of scenario tied into it. Fantastic. Warglaives. The Warglaives were brilliant as well, because we all knew they were coming. Obviously, the Warglaives were going to be coming. They looked spectacular. The proc didn't need to be fantastic, but it was anyway. The problem with the Warglaives is, of course, pure RNG that involves 2 drops. That's a bit of a pickle. And it was totally justified, the rage that came from guilds like Nihilum, who were killing that boss world first, who had no Warglaive sets and had to recruit outside of the guild for the Sunwell. And then there were those guilds who killed Illidan, and many months later, and within 6 weeks, had 3 sets of Warglaives on all their rogues. That kind of shit is very, very frustrating. It's not a personal experience, despite the fact that that is a one-off. We have to remember that. Those weren't typical results. But you can see why the top guild in the world would be frustrated that they don't have more Warglaives than Johnny on the fucking spot, who killed the boss 6 months later. Yeah, it's kind of annoying, but still, that joy remains, the anticipation remains, and the fun remains. What's not fun is farming an old boss over and over again when no one in the raid needs loot. Legendaries always need to be kind of worked out in order to be acquired in a reasonable time. If guilds choose to go back and farm many legendaries for their raid, like we did with Dragonwrath, where we were going back and kitting everybody out with legendaries, that's on them. That's on them. That's no different than when guilds just copied each other to make alts and do alt testing in ICC. Top-end guilds will do whatever it takes to win, but the average guild should be acquiring a legendary. Valonir was pretty much finished for most guilds as they came to the end of Ulduar. If they decided to go back and farm that, that's on them. But in general, they got the legendary they deserve. And I think 1 legendary per guild, or 1 or 2, of the average guild is actually pretty good. Pretty good going. I think that's alright. What we can't have is this system where it's just mundane and bland. For Christ's sake. Bland, boring, terrible results, and catering really to people who were whining. It's like, oh, well, you've given the rogues another legendary, now we want one. And what we ended up with is these terrible legendaries. They're absolutely awful in my opinion. I know some people will disagree with me, but random procs that just do damage and don't do anything else cool. If we look at Dragonwrath, it did just damage. That's all it did. It did just damage. But it also turned you into a fucking dragon. That's also what it did. It turned you into a fucking dragon. It turned Orgrimmar into a very, very cool place. It didn't stick me on a statue in a place in the middle of nowhere that nobody gets to see. No, it literally was one of the biggest events on the server. It had a ton of RP, a ton of lore, and a ton of personal questing to go along with it, which is what legendaries should be about. They should be a journey. What do we want to see in Warlords of Draenor? I think we're definitely going to see some kind of drop again. A drop and a weapon, because we're going to be fighting some big old school dudes who we know carry certain weapons. That's going to be fine. And I'm more than happy to return to that system. More than happy to return to that system. I don't think everybody should get a legendary. The legendaries in map are so boring that most people aren't even bothering. They don't even bother. They'll get it eventually. Or every time I run a dungeon to film something for you guys in maybe the LFR, all I see is people saying, no runestone. That's terrible. That's awful. These runestones just don't fucking drop. It's fucking boring. It is boring. It's frustrating as shit. It's a terrible system, and I hope Blizzard's kind of give that to everybody to say, look, we tried giving everybody a legendary. It didn't work. Let's hope that was the mindset. For Warlords of Draenor, let's get back to boss drops, but let's throw it in. Let's Shadowmourn this motherfucker up. If we know that a certain boss drops X thing, cool. Let's tie something to it. Let's make it work out. Let's have some fun with it and make it cool and worthwhile. And when someone gets it, that it's a momentous occasion. Some people would say we should remove legendaries. If people are going to whine and moan and cry, then we should just get rid of them. Oh, come on. It's an RPG. Legendaries are a part of the RPG universe. Of course they are. I might not be loot-centric, but I know many times how many people have gone, that is a big fucking thing, right? And I want that. Frostmourne is what I want. I want it in and around my balls and anus, and I fucking want it, and it's going to be cool. That's what it's about. People are going to whine about anything. I don't mind. Does it unbalance PvP? Sure, right? Okay, I've been killed many times by being in an arena and then suddenly a fucking Warglaive rogue pops out. But you know what? It was mostly a proc against demons and it wasn't that big a deal and I won many of those games. It can be overpowered. That's alright. That's alright. PvP's not balanced anyway. And I know some people are going to rage at me for this, but it's not all the time. If we're making them properly inaccessible to most, which they should be. A legendary item should be relatively inaccessible. You can rage who you want, but they should be relatively inaccessible. Let's be honest. Come on, this is a legendary. This isn't something that you can pick up from the vendor. Although you can now. We get our legendaries from the vendor. Oh, mother of God. Some food for thought, guys. What system do you want to see in WoD? I know what I prefer, but you guys let me know. Bye, guys.